Unit 3, Day 2. I was really enjoying all of your video responses. Sarah, Rosa, Maria, Shannon. I think that you guys all had a lot of really interesting things to say that sort of tied into one another. Um, Shannon, yours was the first video response that I watched, and it scared me. Um, I don't really like, oh man, math is hard for me. I really don't like discussing math. I don't like being told about math. I don't like learning about math. You talked a lot about how the researchers who were working with the computers were able to create what it was that we were being shown in the reading by like doing things like changing values and manipulating variables to show different things. And even in reading that, Patterson kind of lost me a little bit. Math scares me. But I was still able to grasp, the point of what not only the reading, but, of course, what you, Shannon, were trying to say. Computers were so new for the time, and that brought with it a whole new set of possibilities and controversy and questions about the art world and things like that. Sarah, you brought up talking about the diagram and seeing things in an informational manner, which our professor kind of went over in my group meeting. Rosa was in that meeting as well. An example that she used to discuss the diagram and informational ways of seeing things was a bird. She used a bird as an example. So you see the bird, and the bird can be considered as, it's the end result. It's what you see, it's what you accept, it's face value. But seeing things in an informational way means looking at what makes up the bird physically, behaviorally, understanding what makes the bird work, of course, that's all very biological, but in applying that to computers and the artwork that was exhibited in New York at the computer-generated pictures exhibit, that was all meant, I think, it was all meant to be taken informationally, and more so as to what that meant for the art worlds, and not necessarily for the sake of aesthetic. You weren't there to go look at a pretty bird. You weren't there to go look at a pretty piece of artwork. You were there to experience information and the possibilities that the manipulation of information can result in, which, Shannon, you were kind of, talking about mathematically manipulating those values and coming up with different results, sometimes on accident. Rosa, in talking about, the computer, Rosa, you talked about how working with certain tools can cause a sort of disconnect and how a barrier might be there. You brought up the example of how you created flowers by hand, in your art class, and then in another class you had a device create a flower through the use of computer code, and how you felt like there was a disconnect there. And I can see what you were saying. I can understand that. In making things by hand and crafting something, like say when you're sculpting a statue, you're using your hands, you're feeling the medium, you're manipulating it. You can feel it between your fingers and you can shape it into whatever form you want. And when you're making a painting, it's just a lot more. I've never made a painting before, but I imagine it's a lot more passionate. It can be more passionate in that you, at the stroke of a brush, you have the brush in your hands, you can feel, see, and smell the paint, it's just there in front of you. When you're using a computer, when you're using an electronic tool to produce a piece of artwork, you can feel a little disconnected, and that, you know, the computer can do, in essence, whatever the heck. You know, you can technically create a painting through a touch screen, but it's not exactly, it doesn't feel the same because, you know, you're not working with the medium with your hands, you're tapping and interacting with an interface. But that's not to say that, you know, there aren't artists who work with the computer and other forms of electronic mediums. That's not to denounce the artwork that they create. You know, you have digital art, you have graphic art, graphic design, you have artists who draw comics with the stylus, you know, and interact with their iPad or their Microsoft Surface or whatever have you. It's still possible, I believe, to overcome that barrier and still connect with the medium that you're using. It's just all about looking at it informationally, understanding how that piece of technology works. What makes the computer, what will make this touchscreen form what it is that I'm trying to achieve? How can I create something, for example, on the computer that has depth, that has color, that has a message? I think that that's still possible. It's just about understanding how that technology works and how to manipulate that technology to do what you want it to do. You aren't, you know, you're not gonna feel what you're creating electronically, you know, from a physical standpoint. You're not going to be able to feel it or walk around it or see it in any sort of context outside of that electronic screen. But I do still believe that it can make as much of a connection to a viewer as well as to an artist. There's one artist in particular that you guys brought up, Duchamp. I hope I'm not saying it incorrectly, but about the ready-made art. In particular, of course, the most famous example is Fountain, which was a urinal that was submitted to some sort of art exhibit. I haven't studied it in a long time, so I forget a lot of the specific details. But I remember back when I was studying that and ready-made art and what that meant, it was really interesting and cool to find out what that piece meant as opposed to what that piece was. Maria, you talked about there's appreciation and understanding the purpose of an artwork. You appreciate it more once you understand what it means, and if you don't really understand what something might mean, you have a lack of appreciation or a desire to understand it. You know, like I remember when I brought up Fountain to one of my old friends, talking about, you know, what it was and what I was studying, he like I remember just this deep sigh that he did, and he was like, "Michael, you're so stupid. What are you doing? What are you studying? Why are you studying this?" And then you know, why are you doing art history? You could be studying business, you can be going to school for law, you can be going to school for all these different things. And it just sort of made me think, like, you know, that's why I love art so much, art history so much, because you can just study a urinal, and a urinal in the context of art history means so much more when compared to a urinal from, you know, the average person's understanding. Because as a matter of fact, it's a urinal. You know what urinals are used for. But when you're a curator, when you're an artist, when you're an art critic, you see things in such different way. You have to, in order to be successful what you do, you have to be able to see things in a certain, in a new way. Not only that, but you also have to be able to scrutinize what it is that you're seeing. And part of that is understanding things informationally. What makes up not only this artwork, but the meaning of the artwork. I know that our professor in our group meeting, she talked about how the biography of the artist or the biography of an artwork can be at risk of having too much power, and that can sort of skew the way that you see an art, or a piece of artwork. I know in particular, I was studying Edgar Degas, and he was one of the major founders of Impressionism, along with Claude Monet and other artists. And a piece that I was studying in particular is called Dancers in Pink. And it's this beautiful piece of artwork. Ballerinas in pink tutus and blurred backgrounds, and everything looked as if it was in motion when at the same time all the subjects were standing still. Everything was still, and yet there was just such a sense of motion and dynamics. Fascinating. But when you learn about Edgar Degas and find out, you know, how much of a douchebag he was a pretty racist, not great guy. So learning about his biography sort of made me see his work in a different way. Like, it almost made me not want to study his work, because his biography was beginning to have too much power. And that's a whole other conversation about, like, separating the artist from, you know, the work that they're creating, which can be a difficult thing to do sometimes. But you know, sort of getting back to what it is that we're talking about, seeing things informationally, appreciating what it is that they mean, not seeing something as cold and soulless because it was created through a computer. We invent computers. We invent technology. We create these tools to better our lives and to see things in a different way. And the computer-generated pictures exhibition in New York of 1965 was meant to show things in a different way. It was meant for visitors to see things in a different way. Sometimes trying to cling to tradition and clinging to what we, you know, commonly view as art can keep us from accepting new forms of art or scrutinizing those forms of art in a negative way, a la Fountain. But having a broad scope and a broad openness towards things that are new can be beneficial. So here I go being all positive again. But I think that it's important to have an open mind and to be willing to work with things that you aren't necessarily familiar with in life and in the art world. So I'm really fascinated with this unit because it is, you know, computer art just makes you see art and, you know, information in a way that you wouldn't normally consider. And that's part of the reason why I love art history so much. It's just, it makes you see things in a different way that you wouldn't have normally been able to see yourself. Broadens your mind a little bit, I think. And it can take you to a place that either, you know, you decide I don't like this or I do like this. You know, everybody has their preferences, everybody's different, and that's also another great thing. So, of course, looking forward to your responses, the advancements of this discussion. Thanks again, guys. Sarah, I hope you get better. I know you said that you weren't really feeling well, so sending good vibes your way. Thanks, guys. I'll see you later.